It gives me great pleasure now to introduce our first keynote speaker. Ivan Coyote is an award-winning author, film creator, stage performer, and songwriter, and has performed across the world from Anchorage to Australia. I also got to hear about a trip to Southeast Asia that's interesting. In their work, Ivan grapples with the complex and intensely personal issues of gender identity, as well as topics such as family, class, social justice, and queer liberation. Ivan has performed at storytelling, writers, film, poetry, and folk music festivals around the world, and has provided keynote speeches to labor activists, social justice advocates, university and high school students, healthcare providers, teachers, and school administrators. It's my pleasure to introduce Ivan Coyote.
Just give me a second to get situated. I've spent the last month and a half 100 kilometers away from a cell phone signal with very spotty Wi-Fi and squirrels and bears as my neighbors, building a cabin, and I'm not used to so many people all breathing moistly together. I had to iron my shirt. I think I'm gonna be all right though. I'm just, okay. And then I just had a hot flash, I think brought on by my mask and possibly wearing clothes. And I'm a trans, non-binary person, so if you look like me and you have a hot flash, nobody believes you, really. They're like, oh, sure, nothing like the one I just had. I'm like, no, I assure you, it's quite like the one. So I wrote these words that I'm gonna read for you today while I was drinking coffee in my mom's little place by the Yukon River, watching the river roll by on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tahan Quechan Council, who are the original and rightful caretakers of this place that is known as Whitehorse, the northern city where I was born and raised. And I'm spending the summer at home in the bush to work on this little cabin that I'm building and to take care of my father, who is struggling with the mid-grade, and I would guess, most scary and confusing days of dementia. And I was born in the hospital right across that river, that mighty Yukon River, in August of 1969. I'm a little older than I look. My tip is drink lots of water. And I have 2 grandmothers, a grandfather, 3 uncles, and a cousin buried right behind the hospital in the Grey Mountain Cemetery. I'm a very proud 3rd-generation Yukoner. My family's been in the territory since 1949. And most people who've lived there for any length of time know at least 4 of my relatives, I'd say. And I've left this place, or that place, and returned many times, but it's never ever been gone from my veins or my sense of self or where I belong. But like so many queer and trans and non-binary people, I had to leave my home behind when I was young. I had to travel to, or I felt like I had to, and I think I was right back then, I had to travel to a bigger, more anonymous and diverse place in order to become myself. And we talk a lot these days about diversity. We talk about capital E, equity, and inclusiveness. These are great conversations to have. I think we all benefit from these conversations, but sometimes we talk about these concepts so much that the human hearts and lives at the center of it all become obscured by policy and directives and 12-point plans. And sometimes I worry that we forget to remember the why of it all. So, I'm a storyteller. That's my job. And the storyteller in me just wants to roll it back and start at the beginning. Find the root of my why and follow that to the reason we are all gathered here today. Yeah? You with me? So if I boil it all down, I think, and I've been thinking a lot about what I was going to say to you here today. I'm building a cabin 200 kilometers away. And I can't even get the freaking Sirius satellite radio to work for the last like 60 kilometers where I'm going, right? So I have a lot of time to think. And I think it comes down to belonging, to being permitted to belong, to feeling like you can take up the space and truly belong somewhere. And what I wish is that someone else had done the work to make my hometown a little safer for me back in 1985, when I felt like I had to hightail it out of there. And I wish to this day that place was more welcoming, even today, of all the people that I see living and working there now. I wish that we all felt equally valued and listened to and cared for. And I wish I still didn't feel like I have to speak up and remind the powers that shaped that place what it would take for me to feel truly included. Even though the Yukon is in many ways the only place I have ever felt I truly belonged. So I know that growing up queer there made me tough. I know that leaving my family and hometown and moving to the big city and coming out as trans, I'm facing down all those challenges that came with embracing my authentic self have made me resilient. And then just the other day, my friend, and I think she meant well, in fact, I know she meant well, she told me that being the primary caregiver for an ornery and stubborn and half the time drunk parent who's slipping further into oblivion with every rise and set of the sun was gonna help, her words, build my character. And all of this made me wonder, how much fucking resilience am I gonna need to get through this one wild and precious life? How much character am I going to require exactly? Resiliency. I've spent quite a bit of time pondering my relationship with this word and all that it means over these last few difficult years that we've all sort of been to together, but socially isolated. Resiliency. I started, as I often do, with the dictionary definition of the word resilience. Number one, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. Number two, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. Yukoners, we love to think of ourselves as so much more resilient than our friends in Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, Edmonton. And to be honest, I kind of think that we are. I still to this day have an axe in the trunk of my car and road flares and a tow chain and a toolkit. Even when I travel deep, deep, deep into the streets of a big city, I carry all my Yukon habits with me wherever I go, except today because I flew in with only like the carry-on baggage. But I carry all my Yukon habits with me wherever I go, and I don't think that I'm stronger or smarter than 40 below and 100 kilometers away from a cell phone signal, but I live determined to not go down without a fight, yeah? Not go down without a good parka, a change of socks, a change of tire, and a campfire. I am a trans person who was born and raised in the Yukon in a Catholic family. My uncle was a priest. We used to call him Uncle Father David. It was very weird. And I grew up like that in the late 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. I navigated this, and I still managed to love the place I come from. But today, I find myself wondering what we can all do to make it so that instead of glorifying and celebrating resiliency, we can build communities and organizations and workplaces and schools and unions where marginalized, and I use the term marginalized, but what I really mean is targeted, communities and peoples don't have to learn over and over again to recover from difficulties. How do we foster places where tenderness could be regarded with the same respect and reverence we so readily give to toughness? What if all of us were not expected to constantly spring back into shape after experiencing trauma or hardship? What could we accomplish together then? So I have a story that I want to tell you today. And it happened a few years ago. I got invited to Revelstoke, BC to speak at a conference for small town local government representatives. So it was mostly mayors and town council folks from all over the area, and they asked me to come in and speak about steps that could be taken to make community facilities, resources safer, more welcoming to LGBTQ two-spirit people. And so I worked really hard on that keynote. It really mattered to me. And I got up there and I spoke as someone who grew up in Whitehorse, Yukon, and I still had so much love in my heart for that hometown that I left behind many years ago, and I got a standing ovation. Even the women, this is a big deal to me. My grandma was a cook. Even the women working in the cafeteria making lunch for everybody, they had the lunch going good enough that they stopped and they came out of the kitchen and they listened and they clapped. Get this, the chef, the head chef, she saluted me with a wooden spoon stained red with pasta sauce. True story. Then this dude stands up, okay? From the round table in front of him, and he raised his hand to speak. And you got to get a picture in your mind here, okay? He's wearing a white cowboy hat, like a really big one, inside. I thought you weren't supposed to do that, but what do I know? He was wearing GWGs. He was wearing a giant, flashy silver rodeo belt buckle, okay? He had a handlebar mustache stained with nicotine. Later on, I noticed he had a snuff tin mark in the ass cheek of his pocket of his GWGs, okay? I didn't know who this dude was, but most of the room totally did know who this dude was. I could tell. All of a sudden, this hush fell over the giant room. All of a sudden, no one is stirring their coffee with a spoon anymore. The room is holding its collective breath, and in my head, I hear the whistling melody from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. For reasons I do not yet understand. And just to get a picture, in fact, you have a picture. I was wearing what I'm wearing on that piece of paper. It was a rust-colored corduroy jacket and a floral print shirt with a silk pocket square, not the same pattern, but chromatically linked. Different floral shirt, let the record show. Different rust-colored jacket, look closely, different question. I guess I must like the color rust. I feel like it really brings out the color of my rust. Anyways, the dude introduces himself. He's the mayor of Merritt. And then he says, had I heard on the news about what had just happened in his town recently? Thank you. I definitely had, I said. I'd been following it. You're talking about last month, right? When the high school's Pride Club, your high school's Pride Club, and the Indigenous Students Union banded together and came to your town council meeting to ask the city if they could please paint 2 rainbow crosswalks on the street outside of their school, on the big highway actually outside of their school, and you turned them down? Is that what you're talking about? He said, yeah. Ever since his council voted down that rainbow crosswalk dealie, well, they got publicly shamed, didn't they? And then the CBC television came in, did a report on it too. All of a sudden, all kinds of big city people, never even been to Merritt, all of a sudden had opinions, said awful things about his town on the Twitter. And it hasn't made them very receptive, he says, to members of, your community. He said, in fact, and this is a quote, it had hurt his redneck feelings. That's what the dude said. What did I think that whole debacle? He says. I take a very deep breath. Smile at him, thank him for listening. He thanked me for speaking. Then I told him, among other things, that his council's decision had kind of broken my heart. Actually, it had, in fact, deeply broken my heart. I said queer, trans, two-spirit, and Indigenous, and there's lots of crossover, youth, had all come to them together, united, and asked them for something that would make them feel safer, make those youth feel safer and more welcome in their community, in their so-called public school, and his council had denied them. I told him stuff like rainbow crosswalks meant something to those youth, and that simple sign, relatively cheap sign of welcome and inclusivity could literally be a lifeline for some of those kids. I told him my job was always going to be to get up there and advocate for those marginalized I would say targeted, youth, and that their needs were always going to come before, and these were his words, redneck feelings. And I told him that while I was waiting to speak earlier that morning, I'd been hanging out in the office across the hall with the conference organizers, like I do. And I had read the agenda, like I do, for all the breakout discussions that they were going to have over the next few days. And one big session they were having was how are they going to increase voter turnout for municipal elections? Yeah, they were having a hard time getting people to come out and get involved in their municipal politics. So, sir, I said respectfully, I ask you to consider how those kids you told no to, those 16, 17-year-old kids you told no to last month are going to feel now about in a year when they're old enough to vote. How are they going to feel about participating in municipal politics, sir? I said 20 kids got off their cell phones long enough to come to a town council meeting and ask you for something to make their town and school feel safer for them, and you told them no. Then I told him that I had talked over free continental breakfast because I am an artist, and I never met an artist in my life who didn't like a free continental breakfast. So there I was very early, and I'd been talking that morning at the hotel to the mayor and the town council of Vernon that morning because I'm chatty like that. And in Vernon, I had heard they were struggling to attract a doctor to come and live in their town so that everyone didn't have to drive into Kelowna to seek medical care. It was getting hard on their seniors, expensive for people who didn't own cars, stuff like that. It was impeding people's ability to access health care. That's what I heard about what was going on in Vernon. And I said, sir, big cities all over this big country, they're full of small town queer and trans people who had to come there to find community and acceptance and a safe place to have a beer, play some pool, maybe a place they could meet a partner, a place where rainbow crosswalks stayed painted colorful, rainbow flags could fly unburned. I said, sir, what does closed-mindedness cost a town? Who have you already lost? You don't even know it because they are no longer there to speak up for themselves. Mayor Merritt sat back down. I let out a breath, and then another dude stood up from another table closer to the back of the room. He put his hand up, but this guy was different. He seemed really emotional. I could tell immediately he was fighting back tears, but he talked anyway. He said, I just read one of your books, and my daughter gave it to me. Pardon me, my kid. My youngest, she's just, they have just come out to us as non-binary, and I'm sorry, I'm just learning and I don't know all the words. I just dropped them off at the bus stop in Kamloops on my way here. They're going to the Big Smoke. They're going to Vancouver to go look for an apartment for school this fall. They're not even staying home for the summer to work, even though they could have kept their same job. They can't get out of Cranbrook fast enough. And the tears were falling freely down this guy's face now. He said, and I don't blame them one bit. You know, I know that town isn't changing fast enough. I know it hasn't even barely changed since I graduated. I know my kid is not coming back here. Not coming back except to visit, maybe at Christmas. Anyways, I guess that's what I wanted to say. And thank you, for helping me understand it all a little better. I got a long ways to go, but, old dog, but new tricks. I mean, here I am. I'm listening. He goes to sit back down. I say, sir, hold on a sec. Before you, what's your kid, the one who's leaving? What are they going to Vancouver to study at school? I asked him. He said, sciences. Yeah, pre-med. They're going to be a doctor. So I tell you this story for a couple reasons. I want us to think about who's not in the room and why. I tell you this story because I'm fiercely proud of the fact that as of just recently, specifically just coming up to the last territorial election, but I don't want to be cynical, but just before the last election, the Yukon currently has one of the most progressive policies in the nation in terms of funding necessary medical treatments and surgeries for trans and non-binary people, and this is a great thing and should be celebrated. But I also ask you to consider what good is changing policy if the culture of a community or a workplace or an organization has not shifted enough that its queer and trans and non-binary citizens or union members feel welcome enough in its schools and workplaces and streets and swimming pools and skating rinks to stay and live and prosper there so they can benefit from the supports now provided by these new resources. So I humbly encourage you now as an organization to ponder, who are you already missing? Who has not applied for that open position? Who has not stepped up to become, to take on a leadership position in their union? Who has left the room already because they were tired of always being the only one like them in it? I'm gonna tell you another story, because I think stories are the best way for us to learn to live alongside one another. So a couple years ago, I get a request from a stranger via my Facebook account, a person that I hadn't at the time and still have not met in real life. And her name was Kelly. And she asked me if I would be willing to help her out. She worked as a mathematician, she said, at a high-tech startup firm that employed about 140 people, mostly men. Mostly heterosexual, cisgender men, she said, and she had been assigned male at birth and was still in the closet about being trans in her professional life, but she figured she was ready to come out. She wanted to tell the truth to her coworkers and her company. She told me she had been suffering lately more and more every day from gender dysphoria, exacerbated by having to dress up and pretend to be a man every day from Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, and anxiety that ensued from worrying about being spotted by one of her coworkers dressed as her real self outside of her work hours. Kelly wanted me to come into her workplace and do a Trans 101 seminar for her mostly male coworkers, specifically to explain to them that even though she was trans, she didn't want to be, in her words, Caitlyn Jenner kind of trans woman, that she wanted her name and pronoun to be respected, but she didn't necessarily want to have to wear full makeup and a sequin gown and a manicure every day to the office in order to be accepted as who she really was. She was a mathematician, she explained to me. She was a practical and pragmatic person. She just wanted a safe washroom to use in an accessible location to her workstation. She wanted to keep her job. She wanted to wear clothes she could work comfortably in. And get this, she wanted to continue to be paid the same as her male coworkers. You know, the very same conditions all women deserve and have fought and continue to fight for in workplaces all across this country. She wanted me to be the one, she said, to field the possibly invasive and potentially hurtful or offensive questions that might follow my presentation. Preferably, she said, she had it all mapped out while she was out of the room. That's what she said she wanted. Her aim was to provide an opportunity for her coworkers to educate themselves in an environment where she would not have to bear all the brunt of that education. She didn't want to deal with the fallout. She wanted me to teach them so that she could insulate herself from feeling overly tender or resentful from riding their learning curves when she returned to work on Monday morning. I said, great plan, Kelly. I'm totally in. We discussed at some length what topics she felt were important to cover. We came up with a couple of potential dates. I provided her with a quote for the preparation and presentation of said workshop, and she said she was just going to run it all by her HR department. They were on board. She said she was just going to get back to me on Monday to confirm. And she called me on Monday, almost immediately in tears. She said her HR department had talked to legal over the weekend, yeah? And together they had decided on a much different approach to Kelly coming out at work. The folks in legal had contacted their insurance company, and the insurance company was sending someone in from Toronto. someone not a trans person, but a lawyer, no offense, to do a seminar with all her coworkers on how not to get charged with sexual harassment and how to conduct oneself in the workplace so as not to risk the cost and inconvenience to the company of any kind of lawsuit or human rights complaint. So, instead of bringing in an actual human trans person to help educate her management and coworkers as to how to support and respect her, during an already stressful time in her personal and professional life, her company was choosing to send in a lawyer to scare her coworkers into complying with government policy in the workplace to cover their own asses. Kelly also told me that her manager had made it painfully clear to her that her position at the company was not as solid and safe as she had previously thought it would be, and that the whole experience had revealed to her that she no longer felt like her HR department was on her side at all, nor did she feel like her management team would come to her aid should the almost inevitable hassles arise with any of her 140, mostly straight, mostly male coworkers. She was so upset and scared by the whole experience, she had decided not to come out at work at all for the time being. And she told me at the end, her biggest hope now was that no one in management that she had already come out to so far would gossip and tell her coworkers about her being trans in her private life. So Kelly chose continued dysphoria and ever-increasing anxiety over the truth because she felt that was the safer option, and her company chose fear and intimidation over education and compassion because they felt that was their safest option. So, do I need to bore you at this point? Because I didn't bring the pie chart, but with the statistics and estimates of what it costs a company or organization to disregard the mental health of its employees or its members. What does anxiety cost us? What is the projected price of depression? And what denomination would we possibly count all of this in? Would we count in dollars or in lives? So I'd just like to take this moment to congratulate the people responsible for bringing me here today, for choosing education and compassion. I mean it. I thank you for that, and so does, I'm quite sure, any transgender or non-binary or queer member you have now or ever will have, and their families too. And I will do my very best to make good on this investment in me. And I want to include a little excerpt from a letter I wrote. In the early days of the pandemic lockdown, first couple of months, I was trying to write a mystery novel, but I couldn't write a mystery novel because I didn't know what the future looked like or the present, so I just started answering all my emails backed up, and that became a book called Care Of, Letters, Connections, and Cures. And I want to include an excerpt from a letter I wrote to a trans feminine friend of mine who was also born and raised in the Yukon and who left the Yukon for good a couple of days after being sucker punched in the street just outside of her apartment, a hate crime which remains unsolved and unresolved. And she wrote me a big long letter, and I'm just going to excerpt my response to her. I said, the Yukon makes all kinds of space for women to connect with their masculine selves. In some ways, this celebration of an axe-wielding, tire-changing, self-sufficient northern woman had offered me a buffer, a bit of a force field growing up, as younger me stumbled into and found my butch self and later stretched and grew into my trans and non-binary skin. But I knew it would be much different for you. Shedding your beard and standing up and being seen as your trans feminine self up there. I don't blame you for leaving. I will never forgive our hometown for raising the asshole who snuck up behind you and sucker punched you that night right outside of your apartment, right outside the front door of your home. I know we still don't know who he was and probably never will, but if I know the cops. But in my heart, I believe that he probably once walked the halls of F.H. Collins Senior Secondary School, just like we both did. I know in my heart he was not a stranger, and that truth slays me. It truly does. I hate that you felt like you had to leave, but I get it. I do. I remember when I left for real the first time, packing all my stuff into that shit box of a Ford Econoline van and steering due south alone with the stereo cranked up and Alaska highway dust all caught up in my teeth. I knew that place couldn't change fast enough to keep up with who I needed to become. I knew I could not unravel myself with all of my history gathered around me, repeating over and over who I used to be, who I was supposed to be, Pat's daughter, Dan's cousin, Florence's oldest grandchild, Carrie's big sister. But I didn't have to leave town with a black eye like you did. I will never, ever forget that reality. And last night when I was reading your email again, I couldn't stop thinking about that time we all went to the hot springs together. I think it was January 2019. I remember all 5 of us entering the women's change room. And you and I both falling very silent, slipping out of our parkas and snow boots and quickly donning bathing suits in the very last stretch of benches by the door that led to the pool. I was mostly staring at the floor like I always do, heart pounding just a little, like it always does in those gendered and policed spaces. I glanced up to check on you, to see if you were okay in there, and our eyes met. And I cannot even say how much I loved you in that moment. I cannot describe the immense relief, the giant 50-year-old breath I exhaled into that small space between us, 2 of us, finally, 2 of us with backup, knowing that if anyone fucked with us that night in the change rooms or in the pool, that we had each other. And we had Inga and Antoinette and Sarah too. There were 5 of us, 2 Yukoners, a German, a Tobagonian, Torontonian, and a Swede. I felt like I had a giant fanged and clawed mother grizzly bear living just under my tender skin, and we would both be safe. We were all safe. For the first time, I think maybe ever in my life, I changed into a swimsuit in a public pool, completely unafraid. Might seem like a little thing to most of you. Think about that and the next time you give someone a hard time because you think they're in the wrong bathroom. Hey, do me a favor. And I tell you these stories because I want you to hear from the human hearts behind them. I'd like us to turn the page on the usual stories we tell about trans people. Usually when a school or institution or corporation or union hires me to come in and speak to its students or its staff or its members, there's always a sense that everyone is being asked to accommodate these new and strange requests coming from a community that just doesn't fit within the structures and systems that have always worked for nearly everyone. But I'd like to venture maybe they haven't worked so well for nearly everyone. What if we flipped the story, reframed the story? What if we looked at truly addressing diversity and equity and inclusion as an opportunity to build a system that listens and changes and adapts to actually include and represent the real people it employs and serves? A tall and complicated task, some would say. Does that not mean we shouldn't attempt it? Maybe we will grow and expand and be better simply from trying. Some days I get up and I make coffee and I light the fire and I listen to the wind toss the poplar leaves in the morning air and I let myself imagine this future for myself. A place where my community no longer has to advocate for basic, simple things like respectful language or the right to change our name on documents or something even as basic as a safe place to pee at work or get changed at work or at the library or school or the mall. Really? Why are we still having that conversation? If I could shape the next, the newer, the better conversations about trans issues, it would be to allow space to wonder at the possibilities. What could happen if we were welcomed and celebrated in our schools and small towns and workplaces and unions? What if our bravery and creativity and innovative minds, what if our strength and resilience were truly allowed to flourish and contribute fully to solving problems, to forging new paths, and to truly fundamentally changing this world? What about that? So I'd like to close today with a promise. I'm moving home for good in the spring of 2023, as soon as I'm done this gig at the University of Western Ontario. And I want to come home and I want to live where and how I think I am meant to, in the Yukon. My dad needs me, so does my sister and my mom, I think, too, and I need them right back. I want to watch the sun come up at 11 a.m. through the ice fog lingering over the river that runs past the hospital where I was born. I want to pick cranberries with my nieces and nephews and make cranberry sauce in a kitchen in a trailer in Crestview. I want to insulate my cabin, install the wood stove. Actually, I installed the wood stove between the time I wrote this last week. And finish this new book I've been working on, this mystery book I've been working on. And I want to contribute directly back into my community. I want to be a part of a Yukon that sees into our collective futures and embraces all the changes we need to make. I want to be a part of building a world that honors and houses and employs and educates and serves all of us. And I want you all to pick up your version of this promise, just make it a little bit more your promise, bring it back into your workplaces, bring it back into your offices, bring it back into your work trucks and your meeting rooms and your employee bathrooms. And I believe in the inherent value of this work. I believe in all of our ability to contribute to this better and brighter world. And I want to thank you all for being here with me today. I shared with you some of the connections and compassion and pain and learning and love and humanity that stories have brought into my life. And I truly believe, in the end, all we take with us are our stories. And the most important things we leave behind are our stories. We are remembered and changed and made better by our stories. So thank you for taking the time to listen to a little bit of mine. Thank you. You're very kind, thank you. And I think I was supposed to do a Q&A, but I know that we started a little bit late. Right. Oh, yeah? Yeah. Also, I don't really like Q&As. Okay. And
then you don't have to.
I prefer that we do them later, like while we're drinking wine and stuff like that, and breathing on each other moistly. But David said that he had a story that he wanted to tell to follow that up. So maybe we'll just make a space for a story instead of, yeah? And thank you so much for listening.
So I don't want to make this about me, but Ivan took the time to thank us for giving them the space to be here today, and that means a lot to me. But I also want to thank Ivan for all of the work that Ivan's done and other transgender activists have done over the years. My son is 15 and is transgender, and he came out to his mother and I in the summer of 2020 during the pandemic, and went back to school. The school was very, very welcoming of him. And Christmas came, and we got his report card. And I opened up his report card online because they don't deliver hard copies anymore. You get an email, and it was in his dead name and his pronouns were wrong all the way through it. And my heart sank a little bit, and so I told my son, I said, I've got your program, or your report card, but it's got your pronouns wrong and your name wrong. Do you want me to try and get that fixed for you? And he said, yes, please, if you wouldn't mind doing that. So this was right before the Christmas break, and it was about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. So I knew I wouldn't get anybody at the school, so I sat down and I wrote an email to the principal pointing out the problems and asking if they could be fixed. And my son confided with me that he wasn't completely out at school. He was only out with some teachers, but not all the teachers. But he did want this repaired. So I went to bed that night thinking about, I'm going to get a reply from the school board that we have to go with the official designation on the birth certificate, and we can't do this, and it's all provincial systems that are all mandated, and we don't have ability to change any of these things. And I woke up the next morning and I opened my email, and there was a new report card already there with everything fixed. And change happens, and it's because of people like you, Ivan, that my son is having a much easier time now. So thank you for thanking us for making the space, but thank you for sharing your experiences and inspiring us all to make it better for everyone else. Thank you very much.